Hello, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Kamp, Vice President at the Ames Chamber of Commerce, giving our first 2020 legislative session weekly legislative update. We're excited to get going here again on Monday with the 2020 legislative session, and it'll run about 100 days, which is scheduled to end at about April 21st. Everyone kind of assumes that might not happen, that they might not go that far. They got out about 10 days early last year, and we anticipate them getting out a little early this year so they can hit the campaign trail, as you would imagine. That's a big deal going into the November 3rd general election. But prior to starting the legislative session, we really want to just kind of go through the Ames Chamber of Commerce 2020 state legislative priorities at a high level. And really we're going to focus on 4 core tenant policy issues for the 2020 legislative session. And that includes talent, economic development, business climate, and infrastructure. And while those are fairly broad, obviously, which is the point of those topical issues and those categories, there are some specific things that we want to make sure that we're looking at making sure that we achieve this legislative session. That includes fully funding the Future Ready Iowa initiative. That would fall under the talent piece with the workforce and making sure we're connecting our school districts and community colleges to the resources they need. Addressing barriers to employment such as student debt repayment and access to childcare. Childcare especially is a really, really big issue. There's a cliff effect that we need to try to make sure that we're addressing this session, and then also just providing some additional resources to employers that they can hopefully pass on to their employees to assist with the cost of childcare. Obviously, that also falls underneath talent for that workforce attraction and workforce development. There's also consideration of funding tools for quality of life and placemaking projects. That can go into one of two: talent, with trying to make sure that we attract the population and the workforce with those amenities, but also infrastructure, because sometimes it's infrastructure that's required to attract those individuals via that placemaking apparatus for quality of life. And then we also want to support education at all levels from preschool through post-secondary options. That's both kind of talent and economic development. And we want to grow the economy through capital investment and job creation. That should be no surprise, and that's obviously economic development. But that's really what we do as an organization, and an economic development organization is trying to make sure that we're hitting those metrics on capital investment and job creation and utilizing the tools we have at our disposal to do so. And then we also want to make sure that we're developing and supporting incentives with proven return on investment to targeted industries. Obviously, that also falls underneath economic development, also a little bit of business climate. But that really gets to the piece of tax credits. We want to look at possibly doing some additional reforms and improvements to the 2018 state income tax reform package. And anytime you have a conversation about income tax credits are also part of that apparatus, so they always come up as well. So we want to make sure we're defending the ones and providing the support we need to and the evidence that we need to for certain tax credits, but then also showing and proving the ROI on which ones are and aren't working the best and how we can make that better for all involved. And then we also want to support the Empower Rural Iowa initiative. This was a priority of the Reynolds-Gray administration last year, and it did get passed and was funded, and they were able to pay off the rural backlog for workforce housing tax credits. They also provided some investment for a broadband expansion as well. That's really important as you're trying to attract people and keep people and have them open businesses in rural parts of the state, because that's really something that if they have that connectivity, they can work from anywhere. We also want to protect the property tax backfill. That's hugely important. It kind of didn't get a lot of attention last session in 2019, but it got a lot of attention in 2017 and 18 when we were looking at constrained budgets and dealing with de-appropriations. That's about $160 million, $160 million that kind of sits there. And sometimes that's an attractive pot of money to look at if they're looking to try to fund some other things down at the legislature. But that's a huge deal to the school district, to the city, and to the county. The school district gets over $1 million from the property tax backfill annually. The city gets right around $1 million, and the county in about FY19 numbers got about $700,000. So that's hugely impactful. And if you pull that away, there's only a couple things they can really do. They can kind of shuffle things around, or they can cut services or raise taxes. And that's obviously not something a lot of people want to hear, because they want those services to be provided by those governing bodies. And the last thing we really want to make sure we're doing is obviously falls under infrastructure, and it's planning for long-term infrastructure investment. And that really, it's so broad as far as what infrastructure is. I mean, we're talking roads and bridges and transportation infrastructure. We're talking water, wastewater infrastructure. We're talking broadband expansion in those areas. We're talking locks and dams. We're talking all kinds of different things to help with flood relief and things along those lines too. But those all fall under infrastructure, and it's really, really important that even though we passed the gas tax increase in 2015, that we don't don't kind of turn a blind eye and think that that's kind of been handled and that was only transportation infrastructure. We really need to make sure we continue to invest in those things that are going to set our state apart from the rest. And while these topics that I went through and I mentioned aren't by any means all inclusive of things that we plan on advocating for this session, we plan on doing a lot and we'll be very active this legislative session, as well as with our partners at the Chamber Alliance, the Professional Developers of Iowa, Iowa Business Council, and Association of Business and Industry. We're always working together on a lot of these issues to really move the ball forward down at the state capitol throughout the legislative session. So we really do look forward to having a really good session in 2020. I do look forward to continuing these updates. These are really things I like to do to provide our members the information that they need regarding the state legislative session and what's going on down there. But one thing I also want to say before I close is if you ever have any questions about a topic that I didn't talk about or doesn't fit necessarily within our probably core tenets and priorities, always feel free to reach out to me, because either I can find information myself about it or we know someone that can. So never be afraid to reach out about any specific topic you may have a question about down at the legislature. We're always happy to help. So with that, thank you very much for watching. We will see you next week for the first week of the actual legislative session's legislative update.